Good morning, friends. My name is Darren St. George, and welcome to another Monday morning program with Sal St. George. If you've been with us before, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you. If this is your first time, welcome to the party. This is how we start each and every week celebrating entertainment, and this morning is no exception. We have a very unique program for you that we're excited to explore women serving life sentences with award-winning photographer Sara Bennett. If you have any questions, and I'm sure you will, please share them in the chat and I'll happily relay those over to Sal and Sara. And speaking of Sal, let's get everybody's favorite top banana in. Sal, Dad,
Good
are you
morning,
there?
good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. And yes, I am looking forward to this because this is the third installment. We've in the past have gone to different museums that were based on photographers. Do you have any you have an image
I do.
for
I'll pull that up for you right now. Absolutely.
So recently, these are the two museums that we explored.
And here we go.
There we go.
Yep.
The
Winston
Alice
Link Museum. That was
right.
in Virginia. And the Alice Austin House right here in Staten Island, New York.
And I've always had an affinity towards photography, and I know Darren, you and your wife both love photography, and Cassandra is back there somewhere also, as a matter of fact. But I wanted to find some contemporary artists, and they are artists that can explain how photography works in today's world. And we have a great award-winning photographer, and she's sitting on the sidelines right now. Sara, would you just pop in for us?
And away we go.
There she is, all the way from Brooklyn, New York.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, our pleasure. Sara, how long were you involved in photography? Are you involved? Did you start as a child?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, really, I've been doing photography for about 12 years, but I did have a camera when I was a child. I had one of those old little Brownie cameras.
Uh-huh.
And when I was in high school, I had an old Ricoh camera and I took some photography classes. And I worked in a dark room and, you know, the old fashioned film, but I really had not done photography in decades when I picked up my camera, basically for advocacy purposes. And then I sort of taught myself along the way. My husband's a very accomplished photographer, so I learned a lot from him.
Is a dark room obsolete in this world?
I don't know. I think some people probably still work in a dark room. In some ways, I miss film where you actually, you know, I go out and I shoot like 150 images and then I come home and I look through them all. And with film, you know, you took one or maybe you took two. So it's not as intentional as it once was.
And
I'm glad I have that background.
Yeah, that's something we learned with the wasn't it the
Winston Link. Yeah.
He photographed trains and he would sit in a specific spot. He'd have his camera set to get one shot. Hopefully he gets it as the train is going through.
Exactly.
Sara, would you ever go back to just film? Maybe a project would speak to you to utilize film?
Maybe. My kids both use film. So I think that's a trend with the younger generation.
Are they photographers as well?
My daughter's a filmmaker and my son is a musician and composer. But they both carry cameras, and they mostly shoot in black and white, not always, and they're film cameras.
Oh, I love it. This is a family after our own heart here, Pop.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Keep it in the family.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you, being creative, and a photographer is creative as you are, how did you come up with this concept that we're talking about today?
Women with life sentences?
Yes.
So I was actually a defense lawyer for 20 years. And I left the practice of law to do something completely different, which is not actually on my resume anymore, but I wrote a book about how kids do too much homework called The Case Against Homework. So that's just an aside. So I've sort of followed my passions throughout my life. But around 2009, I picked up a pro bono case of a woman who was in prison for 75 years to life. And so the only hope she had of getting out of prison was if the governor of New York would give her clemency. And I started building this big campaign for her. and I was doing a lot of different kinds of advocacy. So it was more a political campaign than a legal campaign.
Who was the governor at that point?
It was Andrew. Oh, actually, it was Patterson. It was
Okay.
originally Patterson, and then ultimately it was Andrew Cuomo. But I don't know. I just had a brainstorm one day that I was going to photograph people who had been incarcerated with her and have them talk about her influence on their lives while they were incarcerated, because people don't know that much about people in prison. And so those are those first images that I gave you, those black and white images.
You want to take a look? We'll pull them up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's take a peek.
All right, here we go.
But what you said just now, that it was a brainstorm that hit you, that's the creative process. All of a sudden, you just hit on something and you say, you know what, this might work.
Well, I had made an audio actually of I had built this big campaign, and so there were a lot of letters of support for her. Some of them from pretty well-known people, because my client had been in prison for so long, like 30 years at that point, and she was kind of an elder in the prison, and she was she had run a lot of programs, and she was pretty active, and people knew her. So my first brainstorm was, because Governor Patterson was basically blind, is I got 3 actors to read from letters of support, and I sent him an audio. So that was my first brainstorm for trying to get her out of prison. And then this was my second one. And at this time, I did not consider myself a photographer. I just asked one of the formerly incarcerated women I know, can you bring some of Judy's friends over to my house who want to talk about her? And I took their portraits. And so that's what the first 4 portraits, I think, that I in this slideshow are just women who had been incarcerated with her. They had been let out. I put together a little booklet, and I sent it to the governor and state legislators, and I showed it to everybody I could think of. And ultimately, about 1,700 copies of that little booklet went out in the world or were bought. And I told people to buy them and give them to people who had some power. And it was the response to this that set me down the photography path. So this time I used my husband's camera. He processed the images. Well, he still does all of my processing for me, but I used his camera. And honestly, I don't think I had taken a photo in like 25 years, but the portraits came out pretty nicely, I think.
Who are we looking at here? I mean, it's a wonderful photograph.
Yeah, thank you. So, I did them in black and white because black and white is more forgiving. I ultimately moved on to color later, but all my original projects are in black and white. These could have been in color because they were outdoors. But
Wait, let's go back to the first one, Darren. Who
Yep.
Who are we looking at this point?
So this was a young woman who went to prison, and she had if you go to prison and you're pregnant, you can keep your baby with you for the first 2 years. You have to apply to a program. And my client she kind of ran that program and she's actually written articles about parenting in prison, and also like those parenting years from ages 0 to 3. So this is a woman who went to prison pregnant, and then she had her baby while she was in prison, and she only had a short-term sentence. So she didn't actually have to send her baby home. Her baby came home with her. But a lot of times women have to, if they're incarcerated for longer than 18 months, then the baby gets home and gets sent home either to foster care or family member or something like that.
What a wonderful smile you have on both of them.
Yeah, I mean, and they were really influenced by Judy. And I'm sorry, I don't have, all of my work has writing attached to it.
Yes,
And,
we just took the pictures today. But on the website, all of the details are there.
Yeah. And so they wrote about Judy's influence. One of them said, if I could have gone back to prison for a year for Judy to come out, I would have done that for her. Like, that was their love for her. So, but it was really people's response to it. They were like, she was in prison? She's so pretty. She had 3 children. How does that work? What did they do? People were really, really curious about more curious actually about these women than they were about my client. And so, which was kind of the point, because I wanted people to think about incarceration.
Wow. And so now this is another family
Yeah. So she was in
expressing
prison
support.
also for probably, 18 months or 2 years. And um, the older children were home with other family members, and the baby was born in prison. So this was somebody who had been incarcerated with Judy. She had spent 15 years in prison and then had come home. And she was actually the person who organized all of the other women to come to my house so I could photograph them. And then this is a grandmother, a mother, and then the child. And the grandmother and the mother were actually in prison together.
Wow.
So, and what they said is that they had when the daughter showed up in prison, the woman on the left, the grandmother, was so angry at her daughter for ending up incarcerated that they had a really terrible relationship. And they attributed the fact that they reconciled to Judy. So that was, that was why I included them, because I was trying to show through other people the influence and the humanity and sort of the rehabilitation of somebody who was serving 75 years to life. And do we really want to keep somebody in prison for the rest of their lives?
Now,
What kind of charges are we talking about with these various women that we just saw?
Well, these women had a variety of charges, from long-term to short-term sentences.
I'm going to pause the slideshow for a sec. Go ahead.
But all the work that I've done since then, as soon as I started to realize the power of photography, like I was so excited about it, because I had been a lawyer for so long and I really liked my clients. And I mean, this is also, it's hard to remember, but this is 12 years ago. 12 years ago, people did not even know the term mass incarceration. Now people talk about it, and there's a lot of art around incarceration, and there's the defund the police, and there's a prison abolition movement, and there's progressive prosecutors, and people's attitudes towards incarceration have changed. But 12 years ago, nobody was talking about it. Or not nobody, but almost nobody was talking about it. And so what I wanted to do was get people to think about people behind bars. So my work is all about women with life sentences. They've all committed homicides. They were all convicted of homicides. They all had a sentence that was either the lowest sentence in New York could be 15 to life, but they could have 15 to life, to 25 to life, to 50 to life, to 75 to life without parole. And what that means is if you have 20 to life, you serve 20 years and you start going to the parole board. And when I started this, nobody was getting out on parole. So if somebody had 20 to life, I photographed a woman who had 35 years because she would go to the parole board every 2 years. And the parole board would ask her about the crime that she had committed 20 or 25 or 30 years ago, not who was she now? What had she done with her life? Was she rehabilitated? They didn't care about any of that. So that's what I was trying to do through my photography, is basically change policy. Like, that's what I was hoping to do. I never, ever imagined I would end up on museum walls. I was really, really focused on the people who have power to change laws, which is the legislators.
Sara, you appear to be a very warm, passionate person.
I am.
have any of these stories that you've documented touched you?
They all touch me. That's the thing. They all touch me. And I'm not going to say that people haven't done terrible things and terrible crimes, because a lot of them have. A lot of them had more to their story than ever was shown. Like, a lot of the women I photographed have gotten out of prison because of a new law that was passed in New York 5 years ago called the Domestic Violence Supporters Justice Act. And so a lot of women had serious abuse histories that had never been considered, or that contributed in some way to the crime they had committed. But it didn't have to necessarily be like a domestic violence crime. It could be a random crime, but that was it was just taking into account more of people's backgrounds than we used to.
It
And
sounds
also,
as though your background as a lawyer has influenced your work as a photographer.
oh, totally, totally. Like, I think that's kind of why I've been so successful at it, because I knew what I wanted to say. I didn't necessarily know how I wanted to say it, but I knew I had a goal in mind. And so that made it, I think it made it more powerful. I think it also made the women trust me a lot because some of them knew me as somebody's lawyer, or um, I would never harm anybody. And I think that when you're doing a sensitive uh, subject as a photographer, whether you're doing people who are unhoused or I don't know, anything where there can be consequences to whatever somebody is saying, it's really important for the photographer to really understand that topic. Otherwise, you could actually harm somebody who's still in prison and is trying to get out.
I love
So
the
how,
application of that idea of do no harm. We understand it for doctors. That's usually where the phrase
Yeah.
comes from.
Hmm.
But the idea as an artist accepting that responsibility is really
Hmm.
noble.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really, really important. And sometimes the women themselves don't know the consequences. And especially, you'll see later, but I include the handwriting in some of the women's
Mm.
photos. And I asked them what they want to say to the outside world. And one woman said to me, "Well, I'm innocent." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to say whether you are or you aren't, but you're going to the parole board next year, and you might get a lawyer who says, like, if you go to the parole board and you say you're innocent, they're never going to let you go because they want you to take responsibility for your crime." And so I said to her, "I think that you should say, let's leave this aside, and why don't you talk about something else?" And sure enough, when she came up for parole the next year, I I found out what her crime was and all of the details of it. And she thought she was innocent because she had gone with her boyfriend somewhere. She fell asleep in the car. He went in a building and killed somebody and came out. And she was convicted of felony murder. And she was actually convicted 20 years later. That took them 20 years to figure it out. And they offered her a plea deal of 2 to 6 years, meaning if she pled guilty, she would have spent 2 years in prison. But she didn't understand that if she went to trial, she would be convicted of felony murder. She had a terrible, terrible lawyer. And she ended up getting sentenced to 20 years to life. And she served 20 years. And this is the kind of stuff that I kind of wanted people to know, that, I mean, there's something so fundamentally unfair, right? We offer you 2 years. You don't take it, we give you 20 years. I have another woman I photographed. She was offered 17 years. She didn't take it. She's serving life without parole, meaning she will never come out unless, I mean, I found lawyers for her and maybe they'll figure out something. But so anyway, I didn't want her to say that she was innocent.
Mhm.
And sure enough, when I found a lawyer for her, and I first explained to her when I figured out what it was, I was like, "I know technically you didn't do anything, but in the eyes of the law, this is what felony murder means. So you actually are guilty. So you actually have to say that." And sure enough, she said that and she got out. So, but
Do you
if
think
I hadn't known that, maybe they would have seen it, and then they would say, "But last year you were saying you're innocent. So what's your change of heart? Oh, you're only now taking responsibility after 20 years? I think you need to stay in prison for another 2 years and think about it."
well, you just said the phrase, I didn't know that. And do you think that's the trouble, the problem with so many, she's making these life decisions. So many people
Mhm.
are making life decisions about how
Mhm.
they're going to plea, and it has serious ramifications. Are lawyers not imparting that information of how the system works?
A lot of times, poor people do not have good lawyers.
But
I
the
mean,
lawyers
that's
themselves have to understand how the game. I imagine if you're sitting down to, you need to understand the rules of the game.
well,
Aren't
you wish, maybe her lawyer thinks he explained it to her and she didn't understand it.
okay.
So
Yeah. All right. We
it's
have a
yeah, I have a quick question though. I don't know how old your children are, but have you discussed these matters with them?
Oh yeah, they grew up with, I mean, they're 30 and 33 now. So, and they grew up with me in their young years. So they knew a lot about crime and punishment and bad guys and all of that. But I would always say, like, I mean, after I remember 9/11, I was like, they're not bad people. They've done bad things. Like there's two different, there's that distinction.
No, it's an important distinction. And it's also we're talking about children. That's something my family, we discuss as well. When
Mhm.
children get in trouble, you're not trying to impart that, they are bad. What they did was bad.
Right, exactly.
So,
Because in all the years of this work, I've only met a few people who I actually thought were truly psychopaths, but almost nobody. And that's what I'm trying to to show through my photos is the humanity in people who are behind up bars. And a lot of people are really fascinating people. And not only that, when people have done something really bad, they really grapple with it and they live with it. And so sometimes they're some of the deepest thinking people I've ever met.
I want to get to a couple questions we have in the chat, but you mentioned
Sure.
there were only a few people that you really saw as dangerous. I don't want to hunt down if this photograph exists, but did you photograph those individuals?
Which ones?
The ones that you've considered dangerous?
Oh, no. Psychopaths? No. No, that was more from my legal days than from my
Yes.
photography days.
Okay. All right. We want to know about Judy. Do we have a photo of Judy? And is Judy still in prison?
We do have a photo. We have two photos of Judy, I think.
Okay.
They're probably the last two because usually I give this whole talk and then at the end I show Judy. But you can go to the end. Let's see.
No. We'll make them wait. That's fine.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, because
They're not going anywhere.
You're already going to know. Yes, she ultimately got out. It took me about 10 years, but Governor Cuomo did grant her clemency in 2017. She and she's been out for 5 years. She just had her 5-year anniversary of being home, and she's having a wonderful life.
Looks like we're in Penn Station.
Yeah, well, this is the first woman I photographed for. Once I had done that book about Judy, then I said to her, I want to do a book on women who have come out of prison who had life sentences. Do you know anybody? Or can you introduce me to somebody? So she gave me, this is Kayla. She's the first woman I photographed. And this is the first day I met her. And she had come home from prison. She had served 20 years. She had gone in when she was about 20. So she's about 40 years old here. And she had lived on Long Island. And it was a crazy day because I had to find her in Penn Station and we had never met. We didn't know what each other looked like. It took me a long time to find her. And when I found her, she kind of just fell into my arms because she was so overwhelmed by everything that was going on in Penn Station. So I loved
just the energy of the place.
Yeah. Being back in the real world.
Yep. And she'd only been home, I think, 2.5 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, it is. I can imagine that. It is very overwhelming.
Yeah.
All right.
So this is in black and white because as you can see, I actually love this photo and I think it worked really well, but I wasn't very good at lighting yet. And when I tried to put a whole series together, some of them worked and some of them didn't. So I just turned them all into black and white and it's just more forgiving.
Well, I like it. It focuses your attention. Everything else fades away and you really highlights the subject.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. Because this is the beginning of my career as a photographer.
We have
the very beginning.
We have a question coming in from the UK. So Sara, our guest, writes in, I'm from the UK where many women get longer sentences compared to men committing the same crime. Is that similar and or the same in the United States?
I think I don't actually think there's statistics on it. I think the folklore is that women get more, that women are punished more. Certainly the women I know have really, really long sentences, but I also know men with incredibly long sentences. I can't really answer that. What I can answer is that in the UK and almost every other Western country in the world, the sentences are much lower than the sentences in the US. In general, a typical sentence is somewhere around 10 years for homicide.
Wow. But I respect the idea that more research needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, people always ask me that. I've just never found the statistics to back it up.
Yeah. Thank you, Sara. That's a great question. Thank you, Sara, for your answer. We have another photograph. Oh.
So this This is the same day.
Yep.
This is Kayla. And what happened is I met Kayla and she was going to a meeting of formerly incarcerated women. And so that's how I found my subjects, because she took me along with her. And I walked into the room and there was somebody I knew. And she was like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing a photography project." And she said, "Wait, I thought you were a lawyer." And I was like, "Well, I'm starting this photography project." And I found about 9 women who I started following around. And I ultimately narrowed it down to 4. And I had followed them. I'm still following them. I still take a portrait of Kayla every year. I followed them really intensively for just the first year and a half. And then I actually got my first photo exhibition. And so I didn't, it took me a while to realize that it was going to be ongoing.
How did that transpire? You getting your first exhibition?
Well, my original exhibitions were mostly in colleges and law schools, community groups. I actually knew the one of the deans at SUNY Purchase, and I asked her whether there would be a photo opportunity, and she introduced me to somebody there, and I had a big show, and it was kind of amazing. I mean, I hadn't been doing it for that long. There were probably at least 400 people at the opening, and I had a panel discussion with the 4 women who I had been following, and it was just really exciting. And then I got some press for the work, and I did that by, before I went to law school, I worked as a journalist. So I always used the press when I was a lawyer, and I just had those skills for knowing how to reach out. And it's a lot harder today to get attention to your work than it was 12 years ago. I mean, there's just so much work out there now. But I wrote to somebody at the New York Times, and they took it, and then it just kind of spiraled.
And then how did you end up winning awards? What was that process?
I didn't win anything for this. I started a new project that was actually what I was doing was I was photographing the women in their bedrooms, and they were moving all the time, and I kept on taking portraits in their bedrooms. And I think I told you I had 9 people. So I had 9 women in their bedrooms. And my husband said to me, "If you continue this, I think you will enter the photography world, because it's very narrow and you have a very specific look. And I think it's a really good project." So I just started photographing. I would ask them for their friends, and they would introduce me, and I would do this. I did this bedroom project, and I started entering in. There's a lot of photo contests, like a lot. And I just entered them, and I started winning them. And then when you win them, then you get on photo websites, and then you start getting exhibited, and the prize winners. Believe me, it was shocking to me. I mean, if there's any photographers who are listening, my attitude was sort of, and I actually learned this from my son, who's a composer, and he was like, he'll apply to anything that's free, and he sends the same thing to everything. And that's what I did. I had like a long statement and a short statement, because sometimes they ask for 1,500 words, and sometimes they ask for 750, and sometimes 250. So I kind of had writing that fit each of those categories, and I just had my images set to go, and I just applied. So I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I think one of the skills I have is, I told you I was a journalist, and when I was a lawyer, I was an appellate lawyer. So I'm a writer also, and I think I have very succinct artist statements that made it really clear. I had a very clear vision, and I think it was easy for curators to see that and understand that.
Who are we looking at right now?
So this is still Kayla. This is
in her bedroom.
Yeah, this is Kayla in her bedroom, and this is 2014. So that's when I started photographing her. So this is one of my very, very early bedroom project photos, and you can see the handwriting.
Do you pose them? How do you compose it? Okay.
I come in, I see what it looks like. I ask them to sit on the bed, because I called it the bedroom project. I don't touch anything in the room except that I may open the shades or turn on a light or something like that. And, then I just, we chat now. So this is Tracy. Now I've been photographing Tracy. Also, I met Tracy the day that Kayla took me to the meeting, and you can see on Tracy's wall, most of those photos there are photos that I've taken of her. So she really loved them. And this is kind of you see the way her photos are displayed. So many years later, I always wanted to photograph women inside prison. That was when I left the practice of law. I actually said to my husband, why don't we do a joint project and you can photograph a few people in prison and I want to write their stories. So I actually wanted to do a deep dive into a couple of people's stories, but he wasn't interested in doing it. And I guess I wasn't interested in doing it either, because you'll see it took me like 10 years until I got into prison, 10 years from the time I wanted to do that, to get inside prison and tell stories. And I didn't do a deep dive into anybody. I let their words speak for themselves. But I've also been photographing for Tracy for 10 years. So this is a very recent bedroom project photo, and it's very different from my early ones. I never had anybody smiling or showing deep emotion like that. She was just so happy. I just couldn't, I couldn't not do that. By this time, I was actually using a flash. So in the beginning, I didn't know how to use a flash, and I wasn't using it. And I showed this work to an editor at the New York Times who I had met at a portfolio review. And he was like, oh, I love these. Come in and see me. And I remember I actually called my husband and I was like, I don't think these are ready for being seen yet. And he goes, look, he looked at them. If he thinks they're ready, go in. Great. And so I went in.
Sara, what's your husband's name?
Joseph Holmes. Everybody should look him up because his really good. Yeah. I mean, a million times better than I am, but it's really different kind of work. But anyway, I saw this editor at the Times and he was like, your photos are too flat. You need to learn how to use a flash. And I was like, oh, okay. And I came home and then I asked one of the women I photographed, I was like, they want me to use a flash. Do you mind if my husband takes the photos? And she was like, no, but why don't you just learn how to use the flash? And I was like, okay. So I just kind of winged it. And I use it as minimally as possible, but my photographs definitely improved. And so it took another probably 6 months. I went back and photographed some of them, not Kayla, but Tracy. I went back and photographed, and she was in a different apartment by that time. And most of the people were new after that. And then that was the first project that actually won a lot of awards and it was seen.
Sara, I'm happy to hear that because personally, I have been intimidated to get into using a flash.
Oh, I was so intimidated. And then I asked my husband to teach me and he brought out, I mean, my husband goes with all this equipment. He's got like tons of equipment. And I was so intimidated. And I actually tried to take a class and I took a class, I won't say where. And I walked in and the guy was like, oh, you have a lady camera and you don't have the right equipment and you should better go out and buy all this stuff. And I got my money back. Then my daughter was going out to shoot some one day and she had a flash and she asked my husband, can you show me how to use the flash? She put the flash on the top of her camera. He showed her how to bounce it. She went out and took photos. I was like, well, why can't I do that? I am not very techie at all. And so that's what I started doing. So I was actually inspired by my daughter who just is, I mean, she's a filmmaker, so she knows equipment really well, but she also wings it a little bit more. She doesn't delve into it in the same way.
And what's your daughter's name?
Sophia Bennett Holmes. So she, you can find her on Instagram, and I'll give you the link to my husband's also Instagram.
Okay, actually, and you have a son as well.
What, Darren, what Sara is doing right now is inspiring a lot of people that may be watching that have always wanted to pick up a camera or to use a flash.
I mean, really, like a lot of times people ask me, what kind of camera do you use? And I used to have to write it on my hand because I couldn't even remember the name of it. And I use a very small Fuji. I have 3 different lenses that I use. But like the bedroom project, we're all shot with a wide angle because I wanted to show the environment. And actually, most of my photos do that. And on occasion, I'll use a portrait lens. So it depends. But I'm a big believer in just going out, following your passion, doing whatever it is that you want to do, and the skills will come. You'll learn what you need to know. And for a long time, I thought I didn't actually know much about photography, but I started teaching a class to women who live in supportive housing in New York City. And I discovered that I actually knew a little bit more than I thought I did. So I had picked it up along the way. So then this is inside prison. And I finally I guess I finally had the confidence to actually reach out to the Department of Corrections and ask them, could I come in and photograph inside prison? And they said, yes, I could photograph in a conference room. And I said, that would be really boring. I wanted to photograph women inside their cells because that was the corollary to the bedroom project. And they said, absolutely not in a zillion years. And I was like, can I talk to your supervisor? And the person was, I'm as far as this goes. And I was like, it will be really boring to just have people in the conference room. Are there other spaces I could maybe do? And so we talked about it, and eventually we settled on basically their workspaces, most of them in their workspaces. And so I think the Department of Corrections thought I was doing a workspace project, but I was doing a portrait project. And it was amazing because I got to see all different parts of the prison. And you don't really see this. Like, I haven't seen that much work that's inside prison that's in more than one or two locations. And I had been going to prison at this point for like 30 years. And there was a lawyer's room I used to go to. I used to sit in a visiting room. And at one point I gave a talk in the prison, and that was in a gym. But I had never seen the rest of the prison, and I got to see it. It was amazing.
But isn't that interesting, Sarah? The Department of Corrections thought it was about the building, and it takes you, an artist, to come and be like, no, this is about people.
No, to me. I mean,
of course.
I think, yeah.
Of course.
It was really great. And because the bedroom project had done so well, I just did the exact same format with the handwriting. I asked everybody, what did they want to say to the outside world? And it was interesting because I felt like the women on the outside, no matter where they lived, and a lot of them live in shelters, they were so grateful for the little bits that they had. They were so happy and so free and so grateful. And the women on the inside felt so forgotten and alone. And this project, because it's actually been seen a lot, and at one of the exhibitions I had, it was in this place called Photoville in Brooklyn, New York. It's a big photo exhibition every year. And at that time, it was pre-COVID. They said about more than 100,000 people passed through during the course of the exhibition. And I had little guest books for all the women who were in prison. And they were just like little books that were like about this size. And I had their photo on the front and pens, and people wrote notes to the women. And over the course of that exhibition, 2 booklets were filled up for each woman. And I got to send them to them. And it just made them feel really, seen in a way that they weren't. And for somebody like Sahaya, was one of the youngest women I photographed. Here she's 23, and she'd been in prison since she was 16. So she was always getting into trouble still in prison. I mean, she was young and she has a really long sentence. She started to see herself as a role model. And so she started to go to college. And I mean, I think she was what was she doing here? She was in the library there. Mm-hmm. But she just started not being in trouble anymore. And she started seeing herself as a role model. It was amazing.
I'm also glad to see this photograph and that you turned to color and a flash. It's wonderful.
And what I love about this is when she showed up with that pink lipstick, right?
Yep. She just popped.
So she's 23, but it looks like the lipstick of a 16-year-old, right? I mean, when you think about it.
Yeah. Who's buying that shade?
Right. And that was something that happens in prison is sort of, you're both young and old at the same time. So this is the young part of her. And sometimes when people come out of prison, like Kayla, when she came out at 40, but she had been in since she was, I think I said 20, but I think actually Kayla went in when she was 18. Her development had stopped in certain ways. You know, she'd never had her own apartment. She'd never written a check. She had never gone through those stages that you go through in your late teens, your 20s. And so I say it's quick in development, but I feel like she went through all those stages. Yeah. And probably it took her 2 or 3 years to catch up to her chronological age.
And the world changes significantly over those.
Yeah. I mean, for the young women, the very young women I photographed inside, they've already grown up with technology. But somebody like Kayla, she went to prison when there were tokens. And she came out with Metro cards. Of course, never seen a cell phone. In prison, they don't have access to the internet. So they have computers, but the computers are like the old-fashioned computers. They're still doing research like in the library and on paper. So they've missed out on decades of change.
Sara, you as a photographer and a lawyer, was there one particular case, one subject that you wish you were able to help to get out earlier, or any?
I kind of have helped a lot of them in some way or another. A few of them I actually was at a certain point, I was either their lawyer or I was co-counsel for a few of them. A lot of them I found lawyers for. Like this is the person I was talking about who has life without parole, but was offered a plea deal of 17 years. I mean, there were two that really, really, really struck me, but this is one of them. I just find that to be so outrageous that you think that 17 years is fine. We'll give you 17 years. Okay, you don't want to take that? We will give you life. It's not like they found out anything different during the trial that they knew from the plea. It's just totally being punished for going to trial. And I just find that so outrageous. So that was one that really, really bothered me.
There's one sentence here, if it's kind of small to see it off of the screen share, but she writes, her name is Kat. Although I wear a scarlet letter, I am so much more. Rehabilitation is within.
Yeah. And see, that's beautiful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And she was a truck driver, a long distance truck driver. So for her to be so confined, it's just really incredible. I mean, this is actually another one that really bothers me. I don't usually talk about the facts of people's cases that much, but she was actually having a psychotic episode in her house. And so for some reason, I think she ran outside and she was with her cousins and they put her in the car. They thought she would be safe in the car. And she was actually, I think she was naked. And the key was in the car and she drove off and she hit somebody who died. And then she got sentenced to 22 and a half years. But she was in the midst of a psychotic episode. So there was like nothing, but it was vehicular homicide. And, I kind of wish people knew some of that because sometimes we think people who are in prison for decades and decades deserve it. There's another one I'll talk about. If you want to show the women in the wedding dress, I think I have her in there, right?
I think so. And I just wanted to point out, she has a line here, do not judge me by my crime. One incident should never define an individual. And it's very similar to a quote I've heard before, is one action does not define a man, but rather the sum of his actions.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's continue here.
Oh, and this is the fire and safety. So she was in charge of the fire, all the fire equipment. And do you remember when there was that escape from Clinton? Everybody remember that? There were two guys who escaped from Clinton Correctional. They made a movie about it, like a TV movie. Do you remember that?
I don't recall offhand.
Anyway, I think they got to know a guard really well, a woman guard, and they kind of wooed her, and she ended up bringing it, like she helped them escape. But after the escape from Clinton, the whole New York State prison system changed its policy. So people who were long-termers like Taylor, who had worked in fire and safety for a really long time, and she was the expert on it. After the escape from Clinton, they said nobody could have a job for longer than 2 years. They didn't want them to get too comfortable there. They wanted them to move around. And so they took her out of fire and safety and they gave her another job. But after her regular job, she would go to fire and safety every day so that she could train somebody else to take her job. So, and she made about, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what she made, but maybe like something like 16 cents an hour. That's in New York State, people are paid between 12 and 25 cents an hour, unless they have what's called an industry job. Like a lot of people work for the Department of Motor Vehicles answering the phone. So they have call centers inside the prison. They make 95 cents an hour, but everybody else makes 12 to 25 cents an hour. And they have to basically buy everything.
Your story is so intriguing, Sarah. I don't know. Remember Erin Brockovich?
Uh-huh.
The
Yes.
movie with Julia. You've got all the components here. You have all the components here for a great screenplay. Because
well, maybe you want to write. Maybe you want to write it.
I'd be happy to.
And I'll call Julia when we're done. I'll give her a ring, see if she's interested.
Okay, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll get it on the books.
But you've got a great story.
Yeah. She's telling a great story of so many women.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is a freedom photo. I think the one before must be her inside prison, right?
Did I get?
Yeah.
Oh, I skipped. Yep.
So this is her inside prison. And then she got out. She was the first person who was released in New York State under the domestic violence law. So that was kind of a change I think I told you there was a change in the law. So when she was 16, she killed somebody who was 70 something who had groomed her and sex trafficked her. But when at the time she went to trial, it was like she was she was in a relationship with this guy who was 70 something years old. That was the narrative when she went to prison. But then when this new domestic violence law came out, her story was more investigated, and it was understood that this guy had groomed her from the age of 14. And then she killed him when she was 16. So the next photo is her freedom photo, which I just love. And you can tell it was during COVID.
Yeah.
So this is Monica. I met Monica about 6 months after I met Judy to start working on Judy's case. And Judy said to me, can you meet my friend Monica? And I met Monica and I was like, Judy, if I had met Monica first, I think I could get Monica out in 6 months. It took me 10 years to find a lawyer for Monica, and I ended up being co-counsel. Monica was another one who got, actually she got clemency from the governor, but her story was just so horrific. She had a very, very abusive ex-husband, very abusive. And he picked her up off the street and he took her on his crime spree where he killed 3 people. And she was basically his captive. And he killed 3 people. He was one of the first people in New York State when the death penalty came back in, that they were going to give him the death penalty, but then the death penalty was outlawed in New York State. So he ended up getting, I forget what he has. He must have life without parole. Anyway, they tried Monica. They tried them separately, and they tried Monica, and they were like, she was an equal partner with him. It didn't matter. She knew what she was doing. And then when they tried him, they said she was a shell of a woman and she had basically nothing to do with it. Same prosecutor. Monica got 50 years to life. So that was like, of all the many cases I had over the years, that one was just so unfair. She never should have spent a day in prison. And so I love the next photo of her because Monica came home and she met somebody, and this is I went to her wedding. I photographed her wedding, and she's so happy, and it's incredible. And she's like a different person than the Monica, because I used to see her over the years when I would go to see Judy on occasion. I would go in and see Monica, or I would see her in the visiting room. And she was always so, just downtrodden. And now she's not. She's just alive. It's amazing. So I don't know if we have too much more time for these, but this shows you the babies in prison. So this is Asia, and Asia was working in the storeroom where all the baby clothes were, and it was really incredible to see that. And I love her. She also got out early, but she was deported to Panama. And so the next picture is, oh, that's her in her bedroom in Panama. I did not go to Panama, so I used a remote technology called Shutter app. And so people are always talking about collaboration in photography. This is truly collaborative because I was using her phone as my camera. And so she had to walk me around the room, and we had to figure out where she was going to sit. And I asked her to bring in a lamp, and then, could she put her camera there? So that's her about a year after she got deported. And then the last photo I have is, I took this photo a week ago. Her children live in Brooklyn, and they finally got to go to Panama to see her. So they hadn't seen her in 3 years. And this is another remote photography photo. And it's really cool because I actually feel like, I am in the room with them. It's kind of like Zoom or something, right? Mm-hmm. But, the technology is a little better. And I think the photo came out pretty good.
I think it's great.
Asia was very, very, very close to her children, and her children came to see her in prison. They have what's called trailer visits, and you can have them, I think, a few times a year. And so her children would come to see her. And so she went to prison when she was pregnant with her son. She was not allowed to keep him because she was facing a life sentence. So she gave birth in prison, and then he was taken away immediately. Her daughter was about a year when she went to prison. So this is, I actually won a Guggenheim this year, and I'm working on a book that is going to tell like these bigger stories. And Asia made a book for her children, a hand-drawn book that I'm hoping to include some of that in mine. So I'm hoping people will get to know a little bit more through the photo book that I'm making of, some of these stories that we're talking about today, but mostly it's going to be through the women's own words, very little of my own. So this is Judy. And this is Judy after she came home from prison.
And this is Judy. Wow.
Yeah. So by the time she came home, she was 69. She went in when she was 30.
What did she go in for? I can't remember if we said.
I didn't say. I never mind saying. She's somebody I actually don't mind saying because she's very high profile. Her name is Judy Clark, and she was part of a political group in the 80s. She was part of SDS, in Students for Democratic Society, in the 60s, and then she became part of a very fringe political group whose idea was basically, it was kind of like a Robin Hood idea, like steal from the rich and give to the poor. I don't know if you're probably too young to remember this, but Sal probably is not. There was a big Brinks robbery in Rockland County, New York, where two police officers and a security guard were killed. And she was actually what I call an off-the-scene getaway driver. So she was not actually there when the killing took place. She was somewhere else because they were using white women sort of as decoys to put the police off track, because the people who had committed the crime were Black men. And so the idea was they would be looking for Black men. They wouldn't be looking. So the men would jump in the cars with these white women who were a few miles away from the crime. So Judy did not represent her. Judy did not put on a defense at trial. The people who actually did the shootings, most of them never served much time, if anything, because they couldn't convict them. And so she and two other people ended up sort of being the or she and one other person actually, they did not defend themselves at trial. They say that she was in the basement of the courthouse while the trial was going on. It was like a political idea. And so she got sentenced to 75 years to life. And ordinarily somebody like her, she had a co-defendant who was in pretty much a similar situation, a little closer to the crime, who pled guilty and got 20 years and got out at 22 years. So Judy served 39 years. So, but because I think it's also because Judy had a background, you know, she was more educated than a lot of people in prison. She did a lot of good in prison. She developed a lot of programs. She brought in a lot of people. She was, her co-defendant was much more famous. Her name was Kathy Boudin. She was very famous. Judy wasn't very well known, but I made her well known. So, and I want clemency, and I will, you know, I have nothing bad to say about Governor Andrew Cuomo because he stepped out on a limb to do that, and I think it was it was definitely the right thing to do. You know, Judy really takes full responsibility for her crime. She has written a lot about restorative justice and, you know, her sorrow. And I don't know, it was really fascinating for me to work
Sara,
on.
I don't want to change the subject a little bit, but you're a creative person. What is next on your itinerary?
So the last year I've been photographing women over the age of 90 who live alone. And I love this project. I don't know if you're going to show any photos from it. It looks very similar to all of my work is of a piece. You can see that. Yeah. So if you just go to the next page, you can start to see some of them. She was actually a Holocaust survivor, and I was photographing for a project that's out of Israel called the Lanka Project, and there was a call for photographers all over the world to photograph the last living Holocaust survivors. And so this woman is the mother of somebody I knew like 40 years ago, and I had always wanted to meet her parents. And so I asked her, she introduced me to her mother. It was one of the most memorable days of my life. It was incredible. She was 12. She lived in Poland. The Nazis came in, they killed her whole family. She was out in the field somewhere. She spent the rest of the war hiding out in people's barns. So I had photographed her. I had photographed a woman over 90 for a project I did called Yoga After 60. And I met, and one of my neighbors was over 90, and I was starting to think about women who live on their own. And so it's basically been a word of mouth project. It's been, I mean, you can show a few of the others. It's just really incredible. And I read out loud to her. She's blind. She's 99. I read over the phone to her once a week. So I kind of form relationships with these women. And if you flip through, one of the women, her name is Bernice. Let's just flip through and see if we can find her. She wanted to meet the other women, her. And so yesterday, 8 of the women went to her house for tea, and I photographed it. And my daughter made my daughter took a film of it, so she's going to make a short documentary. So we're hoping to have a collaborative exhibition sometime. But it was incredible. It was, you know, I don't think we pay enough attention to people in that age group who, I mean, Bernice was hoping to make a new friend, and I think she did. We passed by the one who's the new friend. So if you want to go back, I'll show you. They really hit it off.
Of course we do.
Go back a little, her. So she's 90. She's a weaver and a dancer, and they really hit it off, and they exchanged numbers. And I think they're going to meet up. I mean, it was wonderful. And it didn't feel like I was with people. I mean, obviously they're very old, right? But it doesn't feel like that. I think we really need to spend more time with people who are old. They have so much to say, and it was fun. It was amazing.
Sara,
so that's what I'm working on. And my book. Basically I'm working on my book.
Well, when that comes out, we definitely want to hear about it, and would love to have you on.
I'll be sure to let you know.
Yes,
it's probably going to be a year.
That's fine. We'll be here. We have a couple of questions I want to get in right at the buzzer. Do you display any of your work at home?
No, I don't. Our house is full of my husband's photos. His are beautiful. I don't want to live with my photos.
That's fair. Vin
Yeah.
is an aspiring screenwriter. Keep it up, Vin. Tell your story. Well done.
Yeah.
We have.
I also don't sell the work. It's being collected by museums, but I didn't make it to hang on other people's walls either. I didn't want it to be like, I think that's a little fetishistic or something, if that's the word.
Okay.
So I don't sell it to private collectors either. But I am really happy that it's in in the Brown Library, and I mean it's actually in the walls. It's in the permanent collection at Brown University, and they just changed their art, and it will stay there for years. And it's in a couple of museums also, collections, and that I'm fine with.
Going back to the photograph of Asia that we saw, does she have a police role? Is she part of the police force in Panama? Her closet appears to have similar outfits that look like security.
No, she's not.
Do you meet with any of the women afterwards? Do you stay in touch and visit with them?
Yes, I have pretty deep relationships with a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, a week ago, my images are in a film called Paint Me a Road. It's a documentary that just came out, and which I highly recommend, actually. It's about Rikers Island prison. But they used 15 of my images. So I invited the women who were out in the world to come, and 8 of them came to the premiere with me of that. So they hadn't seen each other. So it was like there was a reunion of some of the women from prison, and then that was last week, and then yesterday was the reunion of the over 90 crowd. So yeah. I always say I'm not going to form these relationships, but I can't help it.
You're telling. I don't want to just say that they're beautiful stories, but you're bringing these lives to light that we wouldn't have had the privilege of seeing otherwise. The general consensus here, everybody is grateful for today's program and you sharing your work. It's been heartbreaking, heartwarming, great presentation. Happy holidays. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
I want you all, I put the link in the chat already, but sarabennett.org, right there. You can follow her photography and projects. And I'm sure this is where you'll also find the book as it gets closer. We talked about some of her other projects that are on their own, Women Over 90, Yoga After 60. I'm sure there is more to come. This is where
I'm gonna put my husband in the chat. I just always forget his. It's josephholmes.io.
josephholmes.io.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Oh, there we go.
Here,
let's see here. I'll pop.
Well, you guys asked great questions. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was fun. It was really fun.
Thank you. You can also follow on Instagram, Sarah Bennett Brooklyn, right there. Click follow. You can also follow Celebrity Museums. We are on Facebook. I'm going to do this quickly today. We're on Instagram as well. Be sure to follow along. We're at Celebrity Museums on YouTube. We're on X. What are we talking about today, Pop? Who do we have?
Carol Lombard.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And
I think Sara would appreciate those photos.
Some good black and white.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, geez. We're celebrating 5 years over at celebritymuseums.com. Hard to believe, but grateful for every moment. Next week, is it next week? Yeah, already, December. We're heading to the Witch's Dungeon Classic Movie Museum. Lots of fun. We've been before, and we're visiting with friends for the Holiday Sci-Fi Museum. We're heading back to the Barnum Museum, the Titanic Experience.
And the Sci-Fi Museum is in the UK.
That's right. Yep. Allentown, England, we'll be heading to. So lots of fun ahead. Be sure to sign up. Sara, once again, thank you so much for sharing all of these stories and your work, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
And wishing you, your family, and all our viewers a very happy Thanksgiving. And we give thanks to all of you for following us. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you next Monday.
Bye.